Hi everyone, I'm Rick Cavan.
And I'm Ashley Sorensen, and we're therapists at Psyche Soma Psychotherapy in Fullerton, California. And we just wanted to say thank you for joining us again and watching this video and hanging out with us to talk about mental health and music. We just want to remind everyone listening and watching that this isn't a replacement for therapy. There's no implied professional relationship between either one of us and you. If you do need to reach out to someone, we have our contact information in the caption. We also have a list of resources for you, and if you need immediate support, you can call 911 or the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. So,
today's video is about anxiety.
yes.
So just if you guys don't know, when someone is feeling anxious, they may be experiencing racing of thoughts, really fast beating heart, sort of
clenched stomach, clenched muscles,
sweatiness, lack of concentration or difficulty to concentrate and focus,
difficulty sleeping. Sometimes there might be a change in appetite depending on the situation. Sometimes I have no appetite at all. Sometimes I just want to like snack and eat and eat and eat.
And anxiety may be to something general, or it may be to something specific. It may be something that you know you're anxious about, or it may be something that you have no idea is even in the back of your head.
Yep. And I think in my clinical practice, and just being a human in general, I feel like anxiety is the root to, I would say, at least most, if not all, mental health issues. And I think a lot of it stems from early childhood experiences and cultural and systemic oppression and issues as well. So it's not just an individual issue, but a system and cultural
I think
issues.
that, while I agree, I also am of the belief that anxiety and our defenses could be a reaction to difficulty processing emotions. So if we're not allowing ourselves to feel sadness or anger, then there's a physiological anxiety to it, and to not do that, we start using our defenses like projection or minimizing, things like that as well.
Yeah, because anxiety is usually connected to a fear, and when we're feeling fearful, we're animals. So yeah, we're gonna go into that fight or flight mode. We're gonna attack, flee, or freeze up. But the anxiety, the energy of that doesn't just go away.
Sure.
So yeah, we'll get into it. I think my first song kind of touches on that underlying, when we're feeling anxious, sometimes there's underlying feelings behind that. So I'll play the song first. Are we ready to listen? I'll play the song first and then we'll talk about it. How loud it's gonna be. And go. Forgot to preface with what song I chose, but that was Nervous Breakdown by Black Flag. And when I was looking through and thinking about the songs for this episode, when I was listening to them, I was thinking about like just all the similar bands in like the 80s punk scene, Black Flag, Minor Threat, Circle Jerks, and just the punk scene in general. There's so much, I think anger is so much associated with punk music and the subculture. But when I listen to that music, there's a sense of anxiety. And I think that goes back to what you were saying, where sometimes there can be underneath the anxiety or underneath another feeling there can be anxiety. I think sometimes when we can't express, especially in a subculture or when we're part of a community where we don't feel like we fit in, or we're not accepted by the overall culture, there's frustration and anger, but I think there's also there's anxiety with it too.
Sure.
This particular type of punk music, I feel like there's some taste of anxiety.
Sure. I think that because punk was sort of a reaction to the culture, you know, the government at the time and things like, specifically with American hardcore, that I feel like that makes a lot of sense. That like you said, a lot of people just assume that it's angry music, but it's an expression on that anxiety, the feeling associated with that, whether it be anger or depression or whatever. I mean, even Black Flag as a band entirely, they have songs about, this one's anxiety, they have songs about depression, things like that, and that it's a reaction to the broader culture.
And I think when we aren't either connected to our anxiety or we don't know how to deal with it, we react instead of respond.
Totally.
So I think that's where a lot of mindfulness and grounding techniques can be really helpful, so that we can start responding instead of reacting to everything. But I think this song, and especially the outcasts of our culture and our society, there's not just the frustration that we're not accepted or that people aren't accepted, but the anxiety of not being part of a community, that we're like kind of on the outskirts or something different. I feel like, well, that can be really scary to be different.
Sure.
It's also a really good thing to be different, but at least initially there's this like, ooh, I'm doing something different, or I'm going against the grain, and that's gonna cause some natural anxiety, because we're humans and we're mammals, and we want, I think we survive best in community.
Yeah, totally.
But as more advanced mammals, and we have choice, and we are individual in some ways, like that can be kind of risky to not be part of a group. It can, on some level, it can feel kind of threatening to the psyche that we're not belonging or connected to the bigger picture. So yeah, I think that's my little take on that.
So mine is a song called Dread by Nothing Nowhere, who I've played before in our depression video. So to preface this one, this is the first song that came out after Nothing Nowhere decided to end his tour due to anxiety issues.
You mentioned that.
And I just wanna know what I did. Do I deserve this? Like, what I gotta deal with this shit, man. And I just wanna know when it happened. When I lost my mind, and will I ever truly feel happy? I wanna know when the pain stops. Walking around with the same thoughts. I wanna know when the pain stops. Face down, fucked up, you're lost.
So I think on that core, I mean, the whole verse is sort of that experience of it, and really, at least the way that I hear it, has got a lot of emotion behind it. But in the chorus, he says, or in one of the pieces, it's like, do I deserve this? Right? So there's this, like, the anxiety telling him that it is something that he's done wrong. And I feel like, you know, in clients that I've seen, like, depression, anxiety really does sort of create this, like, oh, I'm a terrible person because I feel these ways. And in the chorus, I just forgot the words of it, so I can't even speak on the chorus. But there's a piece, there was a piece that I was going to touch on. Let me see. There we go. So it goes back to the same thing as, like, really trying to figure out, like, hey, am I going to stop feeling this way ever? And that's why he keeps saying, I want to know when the pain stops, and that ends up being like the big buildup in the song is really trying to be done with it. Yeah.
Which, you know, anxiety never stops.
Right.
But it can get to the point where it's so overwhelming that it just like starts spiraling. It
Sure.
sounds like that's where he's at right now.
Yeah.
Where we get in that like vortex of anxiety and cycling through it. But our anxiety can also give us really good information
Sure.
about that maybe we're not in a safe situation, or I don't know, what else can our anxiety tell us?
Well, I would think that from just my own experience, it's sort of that we're not in congruence with where we want to be, or with our values.
Yeah, something's off.
That maybe we're acting in a way that may not be according to the values, or we're not finding ourselves comfortable with where we are in the moment. But like you said, I mean, we have the anxiety as animals, right? And there's like that piece of like, there's like distress and eustress, right? And eustress is used to help us, right? And give us that sort of fire to accomplish things.
It keeps us mobile. And
Sure. But what I tell my clients is it's, you know, it makes sense to be anxious when we're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger as a caveman.
Right.
But if we think that if we're frightened because we see a snake, but it ends up being a leather belt, you know, that's not as helpful for us anymore.
But our reptilian brain doesn't know the difference.
Sure, right.
And that's really great that we can automatically assess without overthinking it. We can sense whether it's a real or actual danger or not. We can feel a sense of danger, and then we can do something about it, hopefully. But then sometimes we freeze up.
Right.
But that doesn't take away the anxious charge that is there. Even, I know you mentioned cavemen, but even if that applies to modern day, you know, if you're camping and you're out in the wilderness and a bear comes along.
Right. You're gonna have to react quickly, or else, you're probably never going camping again.
Probably not. So you're hopefully either going to fight by get big or make a loud sound, or run away really fast, hopefully, or freeze up. And that's really helpful when you need to survive, when it's a life or death issue. But I think sometimes our anxiety tells us everything is a life or death issue, when most of the time it's not a life or death issue.
Sure.
So that's what I love helping my clients kind of work through, is reminding them that it's not a life or death issue, that they do have a sense of safety and agency and security. But again, I think a lot of that stems from early childhood experiences where maybe we were so, as babies, as kids, we're so reliant on our parents to take care of us. But if there's a miss or something goes wrong, where it feels like there's a threat to our safety, we're going to start internalizing that and see the rest of the world as unsafe. And then we go through the world mistrusting people, mistrusting the larger picture, mistrusting ourselves. So anxiety can do a number of things.
Sure, definitely.
But it's also a tool as well. And I think over time, the goal, at least in therapy, isn't to get rid of it. We need it. It gives us good information, but I think creating a different relationship is important. Okay, next song. Anything else that you want to say about that? All right, my next song is by Alanis Morissette, and this is taking me back to my preteen days. I had a conversation with a client a little while ago about the song, and it's always resonated for me. Her Jagged Little Pill album has always been, it's like the anthem of my childhood, even though when I was a kid I didn't know that was the anthem. But now as I'm older and I've done my work through therapy, the song it's called Perfect, but it's pretty perfect. To talk about and process parental expectations on kids, and what high expectations, how that leads to anxiety, and that leads to shame and feeling unlovable. So I'll play that song and then we can talk a little more about it. And I'm sorry if you're annoyed by 90s female singers, but here we go. So, to me, this speaks so much about one thing that I specialize in as a therapist is childhood emotional neglect and abuse and having narcissistic parents. We all have narcissism, so I'm not saying that as like necessarily a bad thing. But when parents have such high expectations and have to box their kids in to fit the certain image, and it's not just parents, it's society and trying to fit into a certain mold in order to survive. I think it really does a number on a child's development, and when parts are cut off to fit into this image, that's gonna cause anxiety. It's gonna do a couple things. It's gonna create a sense of safety, like, okay, if I fit, if I'm perfect, if I do what my parents want me to do, I'm going to be safe, I'm going to survive, I'm going to get through living with this family. But as we get older, we realize, well, there's these other parts of me that have been cast away or shoved off into the shadow, and then they become really underdeveloped. And that doesn't create wholeness. And I think, again, that's where a lot of our anxiety comes from, is when things aren't allowed to be integrated to create a whole human being.
Sure.
So yeah, I love that song. She has a lot of angry songs too, but I think that's a great one for anxiety and just the expectation of trying to fulfill other people's expectations of what they want you to be. So that's all I have to say about that one.
Yeah. So my next choice is Porcelain by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. It's actually kind of ironic for me because this is one that makes me feel anxious. And I only say it's ironic because I do enjoy mindfulness things, but I think this one is a little too slow. And so I've experienced it with, not this exactly, but with clients where we'll do like a mandala coloring page and or like a guided meditation, and they become more active in their anxiety, and when it's meant to kind of calm it down. So this is sort of my version of that, I guess.
Okay. Yeah,
what were you gonna say?
I have a comment about that, but
you can. Yeah.
I think that's important, especially as therapists, when we're suggesting things to help clients. I know meditation and mindfulness and slowing things down is a huge popular thing.
Sure.
But I think that's a great point. It is activating for some people.
Yeah, totally.
To slow down, especially people with anxiety. When you're in this constant fear or survival mode, to slow down is going to feel really threatening. So if you're a therapist yourself, or you're someone who's trying to practice slowing things down or become more mindful and present, just be aware that at first that may be more activating.
Yeah, and that's totally what I will present it as. Like, for some people it is going to make you more uncomfortable.
Because it's not what
saying
you're
that.
used to.
Yeah, totally.
Are you wasting away in your skin? Are you missing the love of your kin? Drifting and floating and fading away. Porcelain. Do you smell like a girl when you smile? Can you bear not to share with your child? Drifting and floating and fading away.
I wanted to see how long you.
No, I could keep
tolerate,
doing the same. I could listen to the whole thing. I really like that song. That whole album is probably one of, in my opinion, one of the best albums of like the 90s or early 2000s. But yeah, it's just way too, like, it's very slow, and it like gradually starts adding things.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't ever like get to a super large peak or anything, but just the way that they constructed it is sort of like, all right,
You notice
come on,
what comes up
come on. I don't know. I can feel like more of a like a anxiety in my chest from it, just listening to them. Like, I can feel it on my legs right now.
Like a tension.
Yeah, just like a little bit of a tension, just because it's like, come on, keep going, you know? Yeah, totally. So I guess just reiterating what we just said, like sometimes those what is I guess more traditionally supposed to be used for anxiety reduction may not always be as helpful for some people. A lot of the times with clients, I'll ask them what sort of coping skills they use already that they find reduction in, because you know, if I mean, for me it'd be like playing music, right? If I already know I'm going to be playing music and that's going to help, then doing, you know, learning a deep breathing technique could be helpful, but I may not do that as innately as I would to go play the drums or something.
Natural.
Yeah.
Even like I've heard when people go like on yoga retreats or meditation retreats, that sometimes they get into such a like trance-like state. Like there are some meditations where you just basically stare at a wall for hours on end. And that, so for some people, can get really activating, and then they start dissociating. It's so anxiety producing that they just like check out. And, they're not present. So yeah, whatever you do try, whatever coping skills you do try, go with what you know. Start, you know, and then practice new coping skills when you're not feeling so anxious. I think that's a better time to try things out than in the midst of the overwhelm. What are some other good, for me, I like grounding things, so I like smelling like essential oils or food. That's really grounding
for me. One of the mindful things that I used to do as a teenager that I didn't realize I was doing it for this reason was building like a whole set of Legos. Because I was just so hyper focused on doing it, it like slowed everything down and calmed everything else down.
Awesome. Like creating something. Stretching is good for me. Zoning out to a good show.
I also I do use the deep breathing techniques, or like counting, things like that to sort of slow things down. But again, it's not something that I started using until I was already working on becoming a therapist. You know, those weren't the first things that I knew to do. So
creative stuff is kind of go-to.
Yeah, totally.
There's actually an exercise that we use in somatic experiencing, and I'm willing to share it with everyone if you just want to listen, or you can practice too, but it involves making a weird sound. It's called vooing. Have you heard of vooing?
I think I've heard of it.
There's also like for meditation, but so if anyone watching, if you want to try this or just listen, for some people it can be, if you're in more of a free state when when you've frozen up from all the overwhelm, it can kind of get things going again. For some people, if you're feeling really anxious, it can help ground. So just notice if it works for you or not. For some people, it doesn't work at all, and that's okay. So I'll kind of explain it first, and then I'll show it to everybody. So you can close your eyes if you want to. You can just look off somewhere. So just find somewhere that you want to look at while we do this. And you take a deep inhale through your breath or through your nose. You hold it for a few seconds, and then on the exhale, you say "voo," but in like a deep kind of like foghorn sort of noise. And it's okay if it takes some practice. Some people get worried that their voice is gonna crack or they're gonna sound weird. It is kind of weird and different, but
sure.
Physiologically and psychologically it can help ground people. You can just sit comfortably. I recommend keeping your both feet on the ground. Some people, I know you can't see my stomach, but some people like to put their hands on their stomach and just feeling the air fill up in their bellies. So I will go now. Check in with yourself and see if you feel anything physically or emotionally or any thoughts come up. I'm just gonna sit with that for a minute. And then I recommend that you, if you're just starting, like just try it once, maybe twice, build up, but I wouldn't recommend doing it more than 3 times in a row. When I first learned about this, I did it like, I don't know, 5-10 times in a row, and I started feeling lightheaded. I don't know why, but my people I've been training with have also recommended just do a few times, because you might feel kind of dizzy or lightheaded. So yeah, that's something to try. You can also Google that or YouTube it. You don't need to use my example, but it's VUU, viewing. Yeah.
Cool.
So I don't know how we got on that, but I think it's you.
No, it's on. Yeah,
okay. All right, time for a song instead of my viewing. Okay, and then this song, it has 2 of my favorite voices ever, David Bowie and Freddie Mercury, so it automatically makes me happy. But it's Under Pressure, which to me is being anxious. It's under pressure, but it feels good, and it's one of those songs where I can listen to it if I'm feeling anxious and it helps me feel better. It doesn't make me feel even more anxious. And I guess it doesn't matter where I start. I don't know if I have much to say about it. I love that song.
Same.
Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna interpret it or anything. I just like it. I enjoy it.
Cool.
And after vooing in front of everybody, it makes me feel a little better. Okay. Any comments about that song?
No, I love that song too. I feel like musically I can see why it would be, I mean, it's just such a kind of an upbeat thing. So
maybe I should have
had a stress reliever.
Had that on the last episode for fun and
maybe,
joy.
Yeah, that's okay.
It is a song about stress to me and anxiety, but it sounds fun.
Yeah.
And yeah.
totally.
Okay.
Cool. Well, my final track is by Logic, and it's called Anxiety. Let's see if I can find the time. Did I write it down?
I think it's that one.
Oh, that's weird. I think I was just looking at it.
Back to the basics. Nobody can erase it. People in the street going ape shit. Battle in the prison, but nobody wanna say shit. But nobody wanna say. I've been living with this every day. But nobody wanna say. Everything will be okay.
So I wanted to pause it on that part. What I think is interesting is in this song, Logic is actually talking as anxiety, like personified.
Okay.
And what he says is like, I'm gonna take it back to the basics, which to me is speaking towards like the fact that we've, you know, evolved and got to this place using anxiety, like we're talking about, like as a survival mechanism. And then he's saying like, nobody wants to say that I have depression, nobody wants to say that I have this anxiety, but then at the end he says nobody wants to say that it's going to be okay. And then it kind of goes a little bit more into the way that the song starts is a little bit more pretty, and then it goes like a little bit more aggressive with him rapping over it. Then it, like he sings at the end and it goes a little bit more melodic, so it kind of ends that way, like it's going to be okay. And
so he's kind of offering, or anxiety, or he is offering what other people like aren't saying, is that it's gonna be okay. He's offering that to himself.
Yeah, totally. And that's kind of those verses, because it starts out in this sort of things are okay, and then he comes in with the rap, and it's like, this is what's happening, right? And it's not aggressive or anything. I mean, the rap itself is, but the verbiage of it isn't. But I like that concept of showing it as like, well, it's there, you know, we're gonna have it, we're animals, right? So it's a part of us, but it's not, it has like a purpose, basically. Like our anxiety has a purpose. So hearing it that way is really, really cool. And then I'm gonna play it from a different part. 53.
And he's saying, I think when you were talking about the lyrics, he's saying that no one wants to say I have anxiety, no one wants to say I have a depression.
Yeah, but then it's hard. I think it's like no one wants to say it. No, like there's a piece that says like focus on mental health. So it's that piece about the stigma, right? And then that no one, maybe not that no one wants to say it's okay, but struggling to be able to accept that it's going to be okay because of the severe anxiety or the depression.
And the shame that comes along with
the stigma,
naming something that doesn't feel good.
Totally.
In this moment, my mind was full of clarity, but my body insisted it was in danger. I looked around and I told myself I was safe, I was fine, but I was convinced that something was wrong. Before I knew it, I felt as though I was going to fall and fade away. My body grew weak, and soon enough I found myself in a hospital bed being told what I went through was anxiety. I refused to believe this story. I searched and searched for the cause of what had happened to me. I began to feel detached from reality. I felt as though I was seeing the world through a glass. I got blood work done, analysis of my mind and body to no avail. The doctor said it was anxiety. But how could it be anxiety? How could anxiety make me physically feel off balance? How could anxiety make me feel as though I was fading from this world and on the brink of death?
So I think there's a lot of things with this. I think it's really cool that he's in hip hop. It's not really seen as okay, or it hasn't up until maybe this point, to talk about mental health. So it's really cool that he's done that. That he's made it more of a monologue explaining his own situation. But I also think it's cool that, or it's sort of telling about anxiety, that it's like, no, I felt this, I'm in a hospital right now, this can't be just this thing that's in my head, right? And so I thought that was a really cool part of it. And, you know, I've listened to interviews of his that he wants to try and, like, you know, be a champion for the people and, like, show these things that they exist and that they're, you know,
it's not all just in your head.
Yeah, exactly, and that there's while there's a stigma, it'll kind of help reduce it, especially again in the hip hop world where it's like not as okay, or hasn't been as okay until more recently.
And there's stigma because shame feeds off people not talking about things and not acknowledging things.
Sure.
But when we can start verbalizing or realizing there is that physical and psychological connection, that it's not just in your head, it's not just in your body, that they are so connected, it helps ease things a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
And it makes room for curiosity and creating different kind of relationship with whatever we're going through.
Totally. And I think this one speaks to me a little bit just on that like piece of representation too. It's like hearing that, hey, this person has this, they're a famous rapper,
right? It's more
and they're this, that, you know, and it's like, oh, you know, I have this too. Let me, you know, I can relate to this person and they're famous. So it's not as, may not seem as difficult to get to the success that you'd like to if you see someone successful also say, hey, I struggle with this.
Yeah. And I think that's important on his part, that he's using his platform and his privilege and that sort of power to help other people. Good song.
Yeah, totally.
About time to wrap up?
Yep, I think it is.
All right, well, thank you all for being here with us and listening again.
And as always, please hit the like, subscribe, comment the videos if you have anything that you want to say, if you enjoyed these songs or interpretations, if there's any songs that you would like us to use in future videos, or topics. If you hated these songs, like, we still want to know. If you would like more things like the vooing in future videos too. Putting you on the spot.
Thanks. And in the comments, if you could also let us know what songs help you through anxiety, or feel like songs that are good representations for you of anxiety. We'd love to learn about new music too.
Totally. Cool.
Right.
Thank you guys.
We'll see you next time. Bye.